Distilled spirits and hops are two things that seem like they should work together really well, but in practice, sometimes it's not quite the case. Today, I feel like I've had a little bit of a breakthrough though. Here's two gins, both of which are hopped, and both of which are delicious. How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I'm Jesse and this is Still It, and over the last 3 weeks I've been working on trying to make a delicious hopped gin. Basically it all started when Still Spirits, the sponsors of today's video, sent me a air still along with the challenge to make, or at least experiment with, a delicious hopped gin. If you have been watching the channel for any length of time, you'll know that I do really appreciate a small pot still for testing things, especially something like gin. And I had to do a lot of testing for this video. A lot of testing. So let's get stuck in and I'll explain how I made these two gins. I'll be putting timestamps in the description down below. They will show up in the little red line, the playhead on YouTube as well. So you can just scroll along, scrub along to the recipes and just watch that, if that's what you're into. Let's talk hops. I decided to focus on two different types of hops. I'll talk about the reason for that in just a second. But the first of those two is New Zealand Sauvin. I felt like I had to pick something to represent New Zealand. It just made sense. And this stuff, for me, I don't know. It's an obvious choice. It's just known for being delicious and juicy and tropical and passion fruit and lime and yum, delicious. The second hop is Chinook. This stuff is kind of piney and resinous. It has a slight spiciness to it sometimes on the flavor. And I just thought this was a nice juxtaposition against the New Zealand Sauvin. For the hop geeks out there, these batches of hops, the Chinook had an alpha acid of 12.1 and the New Zealand Sauvin a alpha acid of 10.1. But why did I choose these two hops? The general idea is that anytime you have a product like gin and then you add a special ingredient to it, like hops, it can go one of two ways. First of all, you can make the hops or the special ingredient just so big and bold and overpowering that it almost just isn't even what the initial product was to start with. So it's not really a gin anymore. That is sometimes cool in and of itself, but it's also quite often gimmicky. The other way that it can go is that you can add just a little bit of that special ingredient in and treat it just like any of the other ingredients in that product. Treat the hops just like another botanical and just have them subtly balanced in there. That can be really cool as well, but sometimes that turns into a bit of a gimmick because you have a hopped gin that doesn't really taste like hops. I chose those two hops, the Chinook and the NZ Sauvin, because I want to make two different kinds of gin. Number one, I want to make a gin that is the I.P Aye of gins. It's going to slap you across the face with hops. It's got some grunt to it. It kind of wants to strip your teeth when you drink. It's bitter, it's hoppy, it's got hop flavor and aroma and mouthfeel and all of the things. On the other side, I want to make something that is pretty much still a gin, but it has another aspect of hops that I love, which is the juicy hop aroma, something that is tropical and fruity, but those flavors are being mostly contributed by the hops. But how do we get there? Because I've never used these ingredients like this before. Whenever I find myself in this position, I kind of default to how I would deal with a new ingredient in the kitchen. Let me explain. In the kitchen, there's a relatively standard way that I deal with this problem. Number one, you figure out what ingredients you want to use. Number two, you figure out the flavors or the characteristics that those ingredients can contribute that you might want to use. Number three, you figure out every freaking plausible way you could possibly cook that ingredient and decide which way shows it off the best. And number four, you figure out what other flavors or ingredients will complement it. In other words, what can you put it with to make that original ingredient really shine? Anyway, let me put this stuff away and get back to the distillery so we can start testing our ingredients. We've got the ingredients we want to show off. That's the Sauvin and the Chinook. Now we got to figure out how to cook them in a way that shows them off or shows them in their best light. So for us, that's different distilling techniques. And for me, there was 4 things I wanted to test for each of these hops. Number 1 was to macerate hops in alcohol. I did it for 6 hours and then tip the entire thing, hops, alcohol, and oil, into the pot and distill it. Number 2 was to do exactly the same thing, to macerate the hops in alcohol, but then separate them. Strain the hop matter out and only put the alcohol with the hop essence into the still and distill it. Number 3 was to put those hops into the vapor path. So instead of letting them touch liquid alcohol anywhere, they went into the little vapor chamber at the top of the air still, and I distilled it. And number 4, funnily enough, was not to distill the hops at all. It was to cold vapor infuse the hops. And what I mean by this is that I took high proof alcohol, put it into a container. So then I put the hops into a tea strainer and put those into the jar, which meant that the hops were sitting above the liquid level. They never touched liquid alcohol. They also never got hot. And I did that for 6 days, replacing the hops every second day. I'm sure you can appreciate that was a fair bit of testing, which is the reason I said earlier on that having a little tiny pot still like this was great. I have pretty much used up my supply of neutral anyway though. So if you guys want to see a specific neutral recipe, a vodka or a neutral, drop it in the comment section down below and I will figure out what we're going to make next. Anyway, here are the results from all of that testing. Number 1, the wet hops. That's what I called it when I just threw everything into the pot. Hop aroma, 3 out of 10, pretty low. Hop flavor was about a 3 as well, but it was heading more towards like a weird, it was the same sort of flavor that I got in that I.P Aye that I made. Just the weird hop flavor that you get in distilled hop spirits. Vegetal-ness was really high. That was like an 8 out of 10, and that's not a good thing for me. It was grassy and pungent. Bitterness for this one was quite high. That was an 8 out of 10 as well. The strained ones, so the ones that I macerated, then strained and put into the pot. The hop aroma was very low. I was hoping that would be higher. It was only a 3. Much the same as the wet hops. The hop flavor was better though. That was a 4. Vegetal was dialed way back down to 1. So I was getting the resin, but not the vegetalness, and the bitterness was coming through as well. So it was a little bit less. It was down to about a 6, but it was a very nice, clean bitterness with a little bit of spice coming from on the Chinook side as well. Number 3, the vapor infused one. I'll be honest, this is what I had put all my hopes in at the beginning. And it freaking let me down. Let me tell you why. Hop aroma was awesome. It was really, really strong, but it was kind of hidden by the crazy amount of vegetalness that was coming through. That was really, really high. That was up at an 8, 8.5, and it was very, very pungent, very, very grassy. Bitterness was about a 5, and that was relatively clean, but giving some spiciness as well in the Chinook. But yeah, overall, not so great. The cold vapor infused one was the interesting one. The hop aroma was excellent. The hop flavor was good as well, but it was quite a volatile flavor. So you'd put it in your mouth, it would taste amazing, and then it would disappear and just taste like the neutral spirit almost as soon as it got there. Vegetal, none. There was none whatsoever. And the bitterness, none whatsoever. The reason I went through that testing with you and gave you my results from it is that I wanted you guys to kind of have the base data that I'm working from. So yeah, sure, you can follow the recipes that I'm about to give you if you want to, but now you've got knowledge, you've got something to go on that you can go out and develop your own thing if you want to as well. First, the ginny gin. This is the one that's going to be a little bit more gin-like. It is going to be on the light and fruity side for a gin, but the hops are going to play like a supporting role, not be the main star in this. So here's what you're going to want to do to make this recipe. Take 1 liter of 40% ABV spirit, neutral or vodka, whack it into a jar and put 10 grams of crushed juniper berries into it and let it sit for 12 to 24 hours. After that time's up, you can put all of that into the still, berries and all. The rest of the distilled ingredients will go into the vapor or gin basket, and in there you're going to put 3 grams of lightly crushed coriander seeds, 8 grams of orange peel it nicely, make sure you leave the white stuff off, and 15 grams of a nice juicy pear. I decided to remove the skin on this one. fire the still up and start the distillation process. You can discount the first 15 to 20 mils. You can call it 4 shots, you can call it heads, you can call it whatever you want. I don't really mind. It's not there in terms of separating the spirit, it's there in terms of separating flavors. And then collect a total volume of about 375 mils of hearts. Once again, this isn't cutting for tails in the spirit itself, it's cutting for flavor change in the botanicals. Take your new 375 mils of gin, whack it into a tall, thin glass jar with a bit of headroom for some vapor, and suspend 15 grams of your hops of choice. I'd suggest something fruity and juicy. I mean, just use New Zealand Sauvin. Leave it there for 2 days and then replace the hops, replenish the hops, leave it for another 2 days, and you're done. Now let's do the recipe for the I.P Aye style gin. I think we should call this one I.P Aye. I haven't got a name for the other gin. If you want to suggest something for that, go right ahead. To make I.P Aye gin, you're going to need 500 mils of 40% ABV spirit. And to that, you're going to add a whopping 20 grams of juniper berry lightly crushed, along with 4 grams of lightly crushed coriander seeds. You're going to want to let this macerate for anywhere between 12 and 24 hours. In another jar, add 250 mils of the highest proof vodka or neutral you've got. I did a little bit more testing on this, and it turns out that macerating hops in low ABV, say 40%, the hops break up almost instantly. Whereas if you use high ABV, I'm using 95%, the hops stay together, but the liquid turns really green. And it turns out that this gives an even cleaner flavor, which is great. So high ABV, 250 mils, and to that add 8 grams of Chinook hops. Now this you're not gonna wanna let go for as long as the other part of the maceration. I'd suggest maybe 3 to 6 hours for this. Once both macerations are done, dump the entire contents of the juniper berry and coriander seed maceration into your still and sieve, strain, whatever you need to do, the hops out of the other part of the maceration and add those into the pot as well. You want literally no physical plant material getting in there. To this, we're going to add another 350 mils of water just to make sure we're down below 40% ABV, and we can get onto dealing with the stuff that we're going to vapor infuse. For this recipe, it's pretty simple. 3.5 grams of orange peel and 2.5 grams of lemon peel. Get your still fired up and start collecting. This time we're going to take about 20 to 25 mils off the top for the same reason as the first recipe, and we're going to collect a little bit less this time, so it's going to be about 340 to 360 mils total hearts. I found that even using the hop method that we're using, you start to get some weird vegetally stuff down a little bit lower. Your mileage may vary, feel free to adjust if you want to. Once again, we're taking our new gin, not proofing it down at this stage, popping it into a tall glass container and suspending 15 grams of Chinook hops above it. This time, however, we're going to do it for a total of 4 times. Honestly, you can do it as many as you want. Just make sure that you are switching out the hops every 2 to 3 days. If they go much longer than that, they can start to go a little bit funky. Another quick tip, guys, just remember that these hops will swell over those couple of days, so don't pack them in too tight. 1, we want vapor circulation, and 2, you definitely don't want them busting open whatever they're in and falling into your spirit. That wouldn't be good. Before I get stuck into explaining the drinking experience for both gins, I want to say a huge thank you to Still Spirits for sending this along and setting this challenge for me. It's been an absolute blast, actually. It's been really, really interesting. It's kind of crazy how well suited to doing gin testing these little air stills are. Once I realized how many test runs I was going to do, I was doing half-liter batches, which was great. The amount of time it takes to get a half-liter test run done is nothing, and the amount of ingredients you use is so small that you can just literally experiment without stressing about having to get a result, which is great. The other thing is just the insane ease of use. There's no water. I could literally plonk this thing over on the bench or on the kitchen table and have at it without having to think of anything else, which is great compared to the little Chinese pot still. I swear to you, I can't make this stuff up. While filming this video, we had insane flooding around our area and had full water restrictions, like not allowed to wash the dishes or have showers or anything. If I was working on any other project with any other still, I would have had to delay it. I didn't have to with this. I could just keep going. Let's talk about the New Zealand Sauvin gin first, shall we? So on the nose, it smells like a pretty standard, relatively basic gin with some orange forward notes coming through as well, and this subtle fruit salad kind of presence as well. If you wanted to bump up the impact from the hops, you could just do another 5 days or something of that cold infusion. That wouldn't be a problem at all. I decided to try and keep this pretty subtle, so it's like a cohesive gin that you wouldn't know something strange is happening with when you first tasted it. There's more of a hop impact on the taste, and it's subtle. It is that juiciness that comes along right at the end. If you didn't know what you were looking for, I don't know if you would necessarily know that it's hops, but it really is it's juicy. I don't know how else to describe it. The beer guys will know what I'm talking about. It just sort of has this luxurious, tropical fruit juice flavor finish at the end. So I'm happy with this. I'm really happy with this. It is a basic gin that has just another level of something else to it. If you wanted to make it more complex, of course, you could switch out or add some extra things to the base gin recipe. But for me, I almost feel like in these situations, stripping the gin down to a bare essential gin and then adding something interesting on top of it is kind of more fun. But that's up to you. All right, the I.P Aye gin. So this smells like a citrusy, extremely juniper forward gin. And the reason I chose Chinook was to double down on that pine that you get from Juniper. So you can smell hops, but once again, I don't know if you would necessarily know the hops. Unless you knew they were in there, you might just think it was all Juniper. Going past that, there's a little bit of spice, the lemon's coming through, but you do definitely get a hint of that resiny, hoppy goodness as well. All right, bottoms up, guys. This is where it's going to all change. All right, so on the palate, it starts out as a gin and then it just turns into a hop finish, which is exactly what we were hoping for in this gin. The hop finish is not a weird distilled hop though. It is bitter but clean. It doesn't have a vegetable, pungent, like old grass clippings thing going on. There's definitely more spice coming through now from the Chinook as well. And it has that mouth coating and mouth stripping feeling that an IPA has in your mouth. The hop flavor is there, but it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb. It kind of adds to and complements the pine and the juniper. Anyway, guys, I need to say a huge, huge thank you to the Patreons. You guys are the guys that make this stuff possible. So thank you so freaking much. I can't say that enough. All right, team. So 2 different gins, both of which I feel stand up in and of themselves as beverages. They're not, to my mind at least, gimmicky. Obviously, give me some time. Let me drink these over some time and see if I still feel like that, or if I'm just sort of high on the backside of creation here. A quick word of warning, team. If you're working with hops, where they're growing, the year they're growing, how long they've been sitting on the shelf, have they been in the freezer, have they been sitting out in the sun, so on and so forth. All those things can completely change the quality of the hops you're working with. So if you're getting wildly different results to what I'm explaining here, it could be down to the difference in hops. Just keep that in mind and be aware that you may need to adjust a little bit. Anyway, guys, I've had an absolute blast making these gins. It's been a while since I've been able to just go into full experimental mode and come out the other end of it. So it's cool. If you've enjoyed it as well, make sure you hit the like button down below, hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell if you want more videos like this popping up on your YouTube feed. And I'll catch you next time, guys. Keep on chasing the craft. See ya.